Hello minions, welcome to the second book of the grade 5 to 6 series. We are doing Hatchet by Gary Paulson. We will separate the book into 4 parts and let's start part 1, chapters 1 to 5.
Ba-bam, bam, ba-bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. Alright, chapter 1, the author wastes no time. We are already on the plane and Brian is sitting on the co-pilot seat. Not a very everyday experience for most people. And it isn't one for Brian as well because as he looks at the controls, he is described to be fascinated. As fascinating the ride may be, Brian is definitely not in a fascinated mood. Divorce. The author does this a lot throughout the book where he uses these one-word sentences which kind of sets an interesting mood. Explains more into how Brian is feeling. Like, think about a word you really don't want to think about, but it just keeps coming to your head. Things like test tomorrow. Or in Brian's case, divorce. The secret, which we'll talk about later on. Anyways, his parents have recently gotten a divorce, and this fact seems to be still lingering in Brian's mind. Question 1. Where is Brian going? Ba-bam. While deeply thinking about the divorce, the plot begins. The pilot has a heart attack, and now Brian is forced to fly the plane. Though he had a quick lesson from the pilot before the heart attack, he doesn't know anything else, including how to land. Once he has a good hold of flying the plane, he decides he'll just keep flying it and try to radio help. And eventually he realizes that the radio is simply not gonna work. His plan B, if you can even call it one, is just to keep flying the plane until he runs out of gas. Yeah, it's not really a plan at all. Once he sees that his gas is nearly all gone, he decides to find a good place to land or crash. Okay, so before we go on any further, let's discuss Brian's character as of right now. In this moment of chaos, Brian is constantly thinking. This is significant as for most, such situation would not be an ideal one to stop and think. But for Brian, he's constantly trying not to die. As he flies the plane, he's constantly thinking of what to do next, a plan. Eventually, when he runs out of gas, he actively looks for the best place to crash. This character that he possesses will be important for the future chapters where he must survive in the real wilderness. Question 2. In your own words, how did Brian manage to survive the crash? Ba-bam. Chapter 4 begins in Brian's dream. He is dreaming about the divorce again, particularly the secret. I hope you can kind of get what the secret is by now. When Brian wakes up from the crash, he is completely confused. It's almost as if the dream were the reality and the crash was the dream. Only by looking at his surroundings, he finally realizes, oh my gosh, this actually happened. He also realizes that he is hurt and bruised everywhere. After all this thinking, he comes to the conclusion that he is alive and that it could have been a lot worse. Well, yes, he could have just died. Brian has just taught everyone a great lesson. Whenever you feel that things are bad, just think, well, at least I'm not dead. All jokes aside, this positive thinking is obviously going to boost his morale and help him survive in the future chapters. Ba-bam. And just when he's using all of his efforts to stay positive, nature punches him in the face with bugs. We're not talking about everyday city bugs here. No, the narrator describes them as swarming mosquitoes completely taking over him. In fact, the bugs are so overwhelming that they clog up his nostrils when he inhales and they come out of his mouth when he exhales. That's disgusting. Ba-bam. Chapter 5 begins Brian's first active step of survival. He decides to drink the lake water. Though he didn't feel good at first vomiting up the water, he drinks the same water source until the end of the book, so he seems to be pretty lucky or very smart because he's the one that decided to crash into the lake. Then with some water finally feeling at least a little bit better, Brian is able to think again and realize another terrible truth. It's gonna be very hard for the search planes to find him. Okay, question 3. Why does Brian realize that his rescue will be very difficult? Ba-bam. Alright guys, that is part 1. This book is very, very exciting to read already. For homework, please read chapters 6 to 10 and download the worksheet from the link in the description below, or you can answer the questions in the comments. See you in part 2. Alright guys, welcome to part 2, chapters 6 to 10. Let's get started. Ba-bam, bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. Ba-bam. Chapter 6 begins with Brian's continuation of considering himself lucky. This time he calls himself lucky as he was able to find a pretty good shelter. There were 2 factors that led to him choosing this particular shelter. Question 1. What were the 2 factors? Ba-bam. Brian can now check off shelter of his survival checklist. He has water and he has shelter. Now food. He thinks that berries would be the best for his primitive survival skills, as you can just pick it off and eat it. Hopefully they are edible. He picks a place where he thinks berries would most likely be located. As he does so, some birds catch his attention, and although it wasn't deliberate, by following the birds he was able to find the berries. I think this is a significant part of the story, as this is the first time where Brian learns a nature skill. Now he knows that if he wants to look for berries, you can find some birds and follow them. As the book goes on, Brian will learn more and more of these tricks, which will help him become a pro survivor. Ba-bam. Feeling relatively better with some food in his stomach, he decides to finish up his shelter. As of right now, I think Brian is pretty pleased of where he is at. He has a good water source, he has some food in his stomach, and looking at the shelter that he just built, he says, good. And I think he feels pretty proud about that. Ba-bam. Okay, chapter 6 ends in a mysterious way. Quote, "Then, at last, with his stomach turning on the berries, Brian went to sleep." The author does this in the end of many chapters. By ending the chapter this way, we get a pretty good sense that he's gonna have problems with these berries in the morning. In fact, this is kind of a constant throughout the book, where whenever Brian feels comfortable or feels good or anything positive, nature always seems to hit him with a punch. As we expected, Brian wakes up the next day with a terrible stomachache. Another lesson learned: don't eat that berry. Brian goes on another adventure to find some better berries. And he does. He finds raspberries, fully ripe, perfect to eat. Again, Brian is in a happy place. But of course, nature's not gonna let him feel comfortable. Hey, there's a bear. The bear and Brian, are literally in a staring contest. After staring at each other for a few or several seconds, Brian realizes that the bear doesn't actually want to hurt him, considering the bear hasn't attacked yet. Then, with his legs having a mind of their own, as the author says, he is running away back to his shelter. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. This is literally the story of Brian right now. As long as he survives these experiences, he will become more educated and a better survivor. Question 2. What does Brian learn from the encounter with the bear? How does this change his perspective on the wilderness? Ba-bam. Let's skip to the hatchet. We actually haven't talked about the hatchet yet, and hopefully you know that his mother gave it to him before he boarded the plane. At the end of chapter 8, he realizes that he can use the hatchet to create a spark, which could create a fire. In chapter 9, however, he realizes that turning a spark into a fire is not easy. Like everything so far, the only way for Brian to learn anything is by trial and error, because there are literally no one to learn from. But making fire seems to be the most difficult so far. He tries many ways, but he can't seem to find one that actually works. But what I love about Brian's character here is that not only does he not give up, he blames himself for his failures. The narrator says, quote, "More sparks, a slight glow, then nothing. It's me," he thought. "I'm doing something wrong." I absolutely love this character. When things are frustrating, it's very easy to blame the circumstance or even another person. As easy as it is to do that though, it is definitely not practical. Blaming won't get you anywhere, especially for Brian, who is alone anyways. And by blaming himself, he is forced to find the solution. Alright, so obviously in the end, he finally managed to start a fire. Question 3. In chapter 10, how does the fire help Brian's survival? Ba-bam. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. That is part 2 for Hatchet. For homework, read part 3, chapters 11 to 15. Hello minions, welcome to part 3, chapters 11 to 15. Let's get started. Ba-bam, bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. Ba-bam. Chapter 11 begins with a quote. There were things to do. Kind of an ongoing theme. There's always the next thing to do for Brian, the teenage survivor. Okay, so let's look at what we have so far. We have water, shelter, some berries, and fire. Looking pretty good. Question 1. How does this checklist of things to do help with Brian's mental health? Ba-bam. So with all these things that he has, chapter 11, Brian seems pretty comfortable. It's clear that having a fire has been a great milestone. In fact, he seems so comfortable that he's able to relax and appreciate the beauty that surrounds him. As much as nature can be horrendous, he realizes how beautiful everything really is, calling it full of life. I mean, that's probably why people living in cities like to go to nature for their vacations, like camping. By the end of chapter 11, Brian adds a new item to his checklist, catching fish. Like always, since Brian is in a pretty comfortable state, the author now must bring him down again. While attempting to catch the fish, a plane flies by. Like he had planned, he runs to make a signal fire. He is too late, however, and the plane just passes by without seeing him. After this happens, Brian changes. He loses all hope and cannot find the willpower to work on his checklist anymore. Though Brian seemed strong until now, it seems that all of his power was fueled by the hope that a search plane would eventually find him. This event has taken away his hope, and now thinking that he must survive without knowing he would actually be rescued at some point has definitely lowered his morale. Ba-bam. Chapter 13. Some time seemed to have passed by since the incident of the plane. The narrator also says that throughout those days, Brian has also encountered some other animals, including a mother bear with her cubs. Again, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Throughout all these encounters with the animals, Brian really understands how to safely navigate the woods. A new encounter occurs, this time with a wolf. Though Brian was scared at first, he quickly completely understands the situation. Quote, "The fear moved then, moved away, and Brian knew the wolf for what it was. Another part of the woods, another part of all of it. He knew the wolf now as the wolf knew him, and he nodded to it, nodded, and smiled." Now, through this ultimate experience, Brian fully understands that not all scary animals are out there to kill him. They are just simply existing together using the same space. I'm sure this is similar to zookeepers or even crazy animal stunts people who stick their heads into the crocodiles. They simply understand the animals so well that they just know that they are safe. Although accidents do happen, I'm sure. Question 2. At the end of chapter 13, Brian is said to have regained his hope. Where did this new hope come from? Ba-bam! In chapter 14, Brian realizes that he needs a better way to store his food after the encounter with the skunk. Another checklist. And due to crossing off this new item of the checklist, now he has fresh fish whenever he needs it. The next item on the list is meat. Brian, on his way to becoming a professional survivor, is again put to the test. Hunting. He thinks a fool bird would be his best bet, but of course nothing is ever easy in the wilderness. Question 3. Why was it so difficult to catch the fool birds? Ba-bam. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. That is part 3. For homework, read part 4, chapter 16 till the end. Hello minions, this is the 4th and final part of Hatchet. Let's get started. Ba-bam, bam, ba-bam, ba-bam. Ba-bam. Brian is pretty much a professional survivor at this point. He has everything he needs: shelter, water, fire, and food. He even has a variety of food. Since Brian now is more comfortable than ever, the author gives him the ultimate nature's punch. Up until now, all these encounters with animals like the bear and the wolf has been about coexisting and not actually hurting Brian. But the author in this chapter wants to teach Brian that that is actually not always the case. No matter how well you think you know the animals, animals will just do unpredictable things. Just like how many people say sharks are not interested in humans for food, shark attacks do happen. Well, for Brian, this first attack is from a moose. He is shocked by how big it is. Most people would probably never even see a moose in their entire lifetime, but for Brian, it happens and it attacks him. The moose charges, throwing Brian into the water. He is attacked a few times, but again, at least he's alive. Interestingly, the fact that Brian is no longer an amateur of the woods and knows a thing or two about animal encounters, that leaves him even more confused as to why the moose had even attacked him. If this were a normal person, like me, I would just think, wow, mooses are dangerous and a moose attacked me, that's it. But for Brian, he's confused because he's trying to understand why the moose attacked him. The narrator says, quote, "Such an insane attack for no reason, and he fell asleep with his mind trying to make the moose have reason. While most people wouldn't try to understand the animal that attacked them, I mean, it's just an animal. Brian sees animals now in a more personal way and tries to understand why the moose would do this. Ba-bam. Now, did you think that was the ultimate punch? No, it was just part 1. Part 2 is a tornado that destroys everything. Well, everything but Brian. Again, at least he's not dead. Now, the important thing to note here is that although the tornado destroyed everything that Brian has worked for, everything is gone. It's almost as if he's starting from the beginning again. Brian knows that it's nowhere near the same. He still has his skills. I think it's a very important theme of this book, the theme of knowledge. People can steal things from you. Nature can destroy your belongings, but nothing can take away your knowledge except death. Ba-bam. After rebuilding a little bit, Brian thinks of something that makes us wonder why he hadn't thought of that in the first place. It's to go to the plane and search for the survival pack. Anyways, the next morning he builds a raft to get to the plane. Though it wasn't easy like anything else Brian does, he does manage to get the survival pack and bring it to shore. I know this was a long section about how he was able to get the survival pack and bring it to shore, but we will just skip the details. The important thing is that he now has the survival pack. The survival pack seems pretty large, a lot larger than I had expected when Brian was acquiring it. I thought it would be like a small backpack or something, but by reading about the content inside it, it seems like a very large travel luggage-ish size. Now, what's more interesting is Brian's reaction to all these new gifts that he has just received. At first, he is very thankful. The first things that he finds, according to the story, are things that he can actually use. So there were things like sleeping bags or pots and pans. Okay, then his excitement kind of dies down a bit. When he sees the rifle especially, he feels that he really doesn't need this. Similar feeling comes when he uses a lighter for the first time to create a fire. He really enjoys and appreciates how easy it is to make a fire, but at the same time, he feels bittersweet, thinking that if he had this from the start, he wouldn't have the skills that he has now. Watching how Brian learned each individual skill and how difficult it had been to acquire it, readers wouldn't wish such an experience to their worst enemy. However, these skills that Brian has acquired over the course of his journey seems important to him, looking at the way he's reacting to these luxurious survival items. Ba-bam. Okay, so in the end, he clicks the emergency transmitter. He didn't know it actually even worked, but in the end it did work, and a plane came to take him. The end. Alright, now let's talk about the essay prompt. In Hatchet, Brian's survival is a result of his resourcefulness, resilience, and ability to adapt. So I want you to take a look at these 3 things. Discuss the specific skills and traits that enabled him to survive in the wilderness. Use examples from the text to support your analysis. So let's take a look at resourcefulness, for example. How does Brian use the tools that he has? So for example, he has the hatchet and everything else is just nature, right? So things like wood, the lake, berries, so things that are around him. Okay. How does he use all these things to meet his survival needs? That's resourcefulness. Second thing is resilience. How he overcomes emotional challenges such as losing all hope, despair, right? When the plane flies over without seeing him, he falls into complete despair. How does he get out of that? Or some other example like that. The last one is adaptability. How Brian learns from his mistakes, from his many, many mistakes that he makes. How does he learn from them, which makes him stronger and a better survivor? Ba-bam. Alright, that is it for the Hatchet series, guys. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you had all the way through till now. All the worksheets are in the link in the description below. Feel free to join my school community. It's completely free. You can get all of these videos and worksheets and even more. Alright, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next book.